For years, I let her take advantage of me, use me, manipulate me, wear me down. I don't know why I allowed it. Maybe it was because I was comfortable, or perhaps I was too worn out to care. I had become numb. When I needed her love and attention, she was distant. Her coldness, like an iceberg in the sea, nearly wrecked me. But now, with time and reflection, I think I'm going to make it all the way. It had been over a year since my wife, Marcia, started her affair with Howard Paddington. Why did I tolerate it for so long? Maybe I was hoping she'd eventually leave. Maybe it was easier to ignore than confront the truth. Or maybe I had already given up. She didn't know I knew about her and Paddington, but I did. I knew everything down to the smirks he'd give me at company parties. We both worked for the same firm, and he seemed to take pride in flaunting their affair. It didn't matter. I had already decided to let her go. I even prepped for it mentally. I figured she'd take half of everything, including the house and furniture, which wasn't worth much. We'd saved enough for our daughter Jenny's college, and I had 3 years left to fully vest in my company. Marcia would probably try to claim a part of that too, but I had already resigned myself to the inevitable. Things took a turn one Saturday morning. Marcia was in the shower, and I was casually flipping through the morning paper when the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, not expecting anything important. The message? Not what I expected. "This is Malcolm Jewelers calling. The engraving on your watch has been finished, and you can pick it up anytime. Thank you." I didn't own a watch. I hated watches. I didn't need them, and I never liked the feeling of one on my wrist. I was confused. Marcia didn't wear watches either, and our daughter Jenny just used her phone for the time. Something didn't feel right. That's when I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I went through my wife's things. There, in her purse, I found the receipt. A Tag Heuer Carrera watch with a black alligator band. The engraving on the back, "For forever, Marcia." Paid in full $3,900. I felt a cold wave wash over me. I knew damn well the watch wasn't for me. With that, I went outside, cracked open a beer, and started mowing the lawn. It took me twice as long to finish, but that was fine. I needed time to think. When I came back inside, Marcia casually mentioned she was going to spend the night at her sister's place in Frackville. I smiled a big smile she didn't notice. That night, alone in the house, I decided it was time. I'd let this drag on for too long. Marcia could have the house, the furniture, and whatever else she wanted. I just wanted my freedom. By the next day, I had everything in order. A quick chat with a lawyer, a visit to the bank, and my affairs were settled. She came home on Sunday around noon, but we hardly spoke. By Monday, I had a plan in motion. That day at work, Howard couldn't help but show off his new watch. I could have let it slide after all. I was already planning my escape, but he looked my way with this smug grin, that arrogant expression that said everything he hadn't said aloud. It was a big mistake. By noon, I had taken a week's vacation. Informed HR I was accepting a transfer to the Baltimore office, a promotion and pay raise I'd turned down several times for Marcia and Jenny, and spent the afternoon wrapping up all loose ends. Marcia would get what she wanted except for me. 2 days later, she received the divorce papers. She called, furious. "John, what is this? Do you want to discuss anything?" "No," I replied calmly. "Why should I sign these?" she demanded. "It's overdue, Marcia. You know that. Signing the papers will make everything easier. You're not losing anything, you're gaining everything. You're offering no support," she yelled. "I gave you 20 years, and you offer nothing? If I included alimony, it would only last until you remarried, and we both know that's coming soon. You sign, and this will be over in 90 days. If not, I guarantee it'll take a year, and I'm ready to move on." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Marcia," I said softly, "I'm the one who got hurt here. I did nothing wrong, and I'm the one being punished. I've known about you and Paddington for years now. Just sign the damn papers." "I'm sorry, John. I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. "I know." The call ended, and that was that. I packed my things, moved into a small apartment near work, and quietly left the life we had built. The hardest part was calling Jenny. How do you tell your daughter you're leaving without explaining the real reason? She didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer any. Somehow, she already knew. 3 weeks before the divorce was finalized, I booked a Caribbean cruise. I hated cruises, but I needed the distraction. The 10 days were long, filled with mediocre food and overly friendly strangers. But it gave me time to think. When I returned home, I was greeted by 2 detectives. Howard was dead. His body had been found beaten at a roadside rest stop on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The murder weapon was likely a baseball bat, and his watch was missing. The police suspected a robbery gone wrong. When they uncovered his affair with Marcia, I became their prime suspect. But I had an alibi, one I didn't even have to try for. I'd been on that cruise the entire time. The detectives left satisfied, but the aftermath remained. Marcia tried calling me, desperate and confused. Howard was gone, and now she wanted to stop the divorce. Too little, too late. I ignored her calls. My secretary intercepted a certified letter from her attorney, but I avoided it. I didn't need closure, I already had it. The final 3 days, I spent in Atlantic City with old friends, celebrating my new life. As I drove back, I felt a sense of calm. Marcia had never apologized, never admitted her wrongs. But it didn't matter anymore. I was free. Before heading home, I made a quick call to my lawyer. He congratulated me on dodging Marcia's desperate last-minute attempts to halt the divorce. But then, with a grin in his voice, asked for $10,000 to cover additional expenses. There was a moment of stunned silence on my end before he broke out into laughter. It was a terrible joke, one that did nothing to ease the tension of the situation. But I had to admit, it lightened the mood just a bit. Instead of money, he suggested we settle up with a steak dinner. I agreed, but that didn't change my opinion of his joke. It was still crappy. Despite the levity, the lingering question gnawed at me. Why had the police dropped the investigation into Howard Paddington's murder so quickly? Why hadn't they followed up with me after that initial questioning? It seemed too convenient. But I wasn't going to push my luck. Jenny called later to offer her congratulations, though she did it in that measured way children do when they're unsure how to feel about their parents' split. She mentioned that Marcia had fallen into a deep depression. Her sister, sure, was staying with her to help her through it. I suspected the financial reality of her situation was starting to hit hard. She was going to have some severe financial problems, and fast. That thought brought a small, involuntary smile to my face as I hung up the phone. I didn't hear from or check in on Marcia for the next 2 years. We lived our lives in separate spheres, and that was fine by me. I spoke to Jenny regularly, but we both avoided discussing her mother. All I knew was that Marcia had lost the house to the bank and was now working at some clothing store in a local mall. Howard's death didn't leave her any financial cushion, either. Jenny mentioned that Howard had 2 life insurance policies, but both named his mother as the beneficiary. Naturally, Mother Paddington wasn't about to share a dime with Marcia. As for me, I tried moving on. A few dinner dates here and there, but nothing significant. Romance wasn't on the menu. Then, later that year, Jenny announced that she was getting married. Her fiance seemed like a good guy, and I was happy for her. The wedding would take place in Harrisburg, where he was from, and of course, I would be footing most of the bill. That was fine with me. I'd do anything to support her happiness. However, I had one condition. I didn't want to sit anywhere near Marcia, nor did I want to socialize with her in any way. Jenny agreed, though reluctantly. I didn't want to risk a scene at my daughter's wedding, and given Marcia's unpredictable state, it was better if we kept our distance. The wedding day arrived, and as expected, it was a beautiful event. Aren't all weddings? Jenny kept her promise. Marcia and I were strategically placed on opposite ends of the head table, far enough apart that we didn't need to interact. Marcia was escorted by a well-dressed man around 50. I didn't know who he was and didn't care. He could have been a co-worker, a neighbor, or even a new boyfriend. None of it mattered. When it came time for the father of the bride toast, I stood up and felt a surge of anticipation. I had planned a small prank, one that only Marcia would truly understand. I held my champagne glass in my left hand, despite being right-handed, and as I raised it for the toast, my sleeve slid back just enough to reveal the wristwatch, a beautiful Tag Heuer with a black alligator band. I held my arm up for a moment longer than necessary, letting the watch catch the light. From the corner of my eye, I saw Marcia's face pale, her eyes locking onto the timepiece. The realization hit her like a punch. She knew exactly what she was looking at. My little prank had worked. I spoke a bit longer, savoring the tension before I sat back down with a satisfied grin. A few minutes later, Marcia and her escort left the room. She looked upset, but I couldn't tell if she was crying. I hung around for another hour, playing the dutiful father, and then quietly left for my hotel room. That night, I slept restlessly. I wasn't sure how Marcia would react to the watch. Would she try to confront me, or would she simply let it go? The answer came at 6 a.m. Two men in dark suits knocked on my door. For a moment, I imagined Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones from Men in Black standing there, and I had to stifle a laugh. I opened the door. "Mr. John Terrell?" the taller one asked. "Yes, how can I help you?" The man identified himself and his partner, explaining they were from the state attorney's office. I motioned for them to come in and gestured to the chairs while I finished getting dressed. I wasn't in a hurry. I knew why they were here, and I intended to make them work for it. "So, what can I help you with, gentlemen? You were at the Peterson-Terrell wedding yesterday, correct?" "Of course," I replied. "Jenny Terrell, now Peterson, is my daughter. We received a call that you were wearing a very expensive Tag Heuer watch during the reception." I smiled to myself, reached over to the nightstand, and picked up the watch. "You mean this one?" I held it up for them to see. "Yes, that's the one," the taller man said, barely hiding his impatience. "Where did you get it?" "Why?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Could you please just answer the question, Mr. Terrell?" "I bought it on eBay," I replied coolly. "Now, you tell me why you're so interested." The men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, the taller one said, "A watch exactly like that one was stolen off the body of Howard Paddington, who was murdered 3 years ago." I didn't flinch. "I'm sure a lot of watches look like this one," I replied. "You're going to have to be more specific." The tension in the room was palpable. They were losing control of the conversation. "Mr. Terrell, do you know a man named Howard Paddington?" "Of course I do," I said calmly. "He had an affair with my wife, which led to our divorce." The shorter agent interjected. "Mr. Paddington owned a watch exactly like the one you're holding when he was killed." "And how do you know that?" I asked. They both looked down. The silence was deafening. Did he have the watch on him when he was found? The agents shook their heads. So you're telling me that my wife told you this was Howard's watch? I said, growing irritated. Yes, the taller one replied. Your wife said she bought it for him. Well, maybe you should be talking to her then, I shot back. I got this watch on eBay for $49. Want to see the receipt? They stared at me in disbelief as I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my wallet and handed it to them. This says you bought a TIG Heuer, one of them muttered. That's right, gentlemen. Take a closer look at the face of the watch. Suit number 2 examined the watch carefully. It says TIG Heuer. That's correct, I said with a smirk. So, did my wife buy a TAG Heuer or a TIG Heuer? Frustration clouded their faces. The situation was slipping through their fingers. Can we see the back of the watch? The taller man asked. Sure, I said, handing it over. Knock yourselves out. They examined it, clearly dismayed. I had made my point. As they got up to leave, they muttered a half-hearted apology. Once they were gone, I looked at the watch again, laughing as I read the inscription I had engraved. Eat shit and die. After a few minutes, I tossed the fake watch out the window. Reaching into my glove compartment, I pulled out the real TAG Heuer, the one with the inscription Marcia had commissioned. Forever, Marcia. I hated wearing watches, but maybe I could get used to this one. And just like that, I knew I was going to make it all the way, just like Sinatra said. If you liked this story, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.